Good morning. So we're starting Siman Shin Yud, Dinei Muktzeh b'Shabbos. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Eitz shetolim boidogim, a stick where you hang fish on it. Afal pi shehu mos, even though it's quite disgusting. Mutter letaltle, it's not Muktzeh and you can actually move it. To Chaim b'Muktzeh machmas mius Reb Shimon Deshari, because we Paskin, says the Mechaber, like Reb Shimon, with regard to Muktzeh machmas mius, something which is Muktzeh because it's disgusting, the Shari, he permits it. Reb Shimon is the Mekel when it comes to Muktzeh. Generally, the Gemara often says that Reb Shimon leslie Muktzeh. It's a bit of a misnomer because there are plenty of Muktzahs that he does hold of, but generally is more Mekel regarding Muktzeh, and in this aspect of Muktzeh machmas mius, he is Matir. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Eitz zeh have a kli, it's considered a kli, because it's designated, it's set aside to hang some fish on it. And a mishum de mos de recheira, it's mos because it's got a very pungent smell. Havel Rabbi Yehuda muktzeh machmas mius, and therefore for Rabbi Yehuda, who's strict there, who's the bar plukta of Rabbi Shimon, he says it's muktzeh machmas mius. V'an Rabbi Shimon the Shari. We, however, paskin like Rabbi Shimon, who is matir. So if you look at footnote 1, he says omnam dvarim hamusim oid, but it's not that we don't hold of Muktzeh machmas mius at all. Things which are very mos could go in graf shel rei. For example, we spoke about it the other day. A chamber pot, v'avit shel meiraglaim, or a pot used for meiraglaim for urine. Kosev le'el shenechshavim Muktzeh machmas gufay. That we do take on that it's Muktzeh machmas gufay. V'chamur dinom misham Muktzeh machmas mius, and it's sort of a more serious, a stricter type of Muktzeh machmas mius. It's Muktzeh machmas gufay. Shekiven shemuusim heimaoid harihin ke'even. So those things are more strict. Things even which are no good to cover a kli, because of le'el shenechshav Muktzeh gomor. Okay.
I would have thought that even if it's more mos, that you should be able to move it.
But it's in other words, it's got there's a special het of graf shel rei that it's because it's so Muktzeh you're allowed to move it because it disturbs you.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's that. But this is a lower level of Muktzeh, and it's not even though it's Muktzeh machmas mius, which is a lower level, but we are matir for a different reason, because we pass on Reb Shimon, who is matir Muktzeh machmas mius. But he's saying the graf shel rei is a more serious type of Muktzeh, and therefore Reb Shimon would agree that a Muktzeh, the graf shel rei, I think he agrees on graf shel rei you can move.
You can move.
Yeah. In other words, he holds that it is Muktzeh.
Yes.
Unlike Muktzeh machmas mius, he's matir. He says this is not Muktzeh, this is not a problem. But a graf shel rei, which is a more serious one, he agrees it's Muktzeh, but there's a special heter for that you can move it. Okay, base. Ein shum oichel tolush haroi lachia Muktzeh l'Shabbos. Very important klal. Any food which is tolush, which is not mechuber l'karka, which is edible, which is roi lachila, it's not Muktzeh on Shabbos. And he goes a whole list of examples. The tamarim mushkedim, dates and almonds, or shah peres ha'imdim l'schera, which it's there for sale. They're you're going to sell them. Mutzeh lechol mehem b'Shabbos. You're allowed to nash those and to eat those on Shabbos. Va'afilu chitim she'zoram, even wheat which you've planted b'karka in the ground, va'adayin le'shvishu, and it hasn't yet taken root, or beitzim shetachas hatarnagolos, and an egg which is underneath the chicken. Mutter letaltlon. You're allowed to move these items because eichel, which is tolish, which is roy lachila, is not Muktzeh on Shabbos. V'chein tamarim halakutim kodim b'shulam, and so too tamarim, dates which have been picked kodim b'shulam, before they've ripened, for koin tzimosam b'salin, and you put them in a basket and they mispashlim elehen, and they sort of continue their ripening process there. Mutter lechol mehen kodim b'shulam. You're allowed to eat those even before they're fully ripe. Avol grogros and smukim. However, grogros and smukim, these are dried figs and raisins. Shemenichim oisam b'muktzeh liyabshan. The Mishnah Berurah will explain the Muktzeh is like a place, a designated room where you set them there, you keep them there to dry out. Asurin b'Shabbos mishum Muktzeh. As opposed to other foods which are not Muktzeh, grogros and smukim are. Why? Shein masrichus kedem sheniz yapshu. Because they're wet, moist fruits, dates and figs, figs and grapes, and you put them in a designated place, often exposed to the sun, where they'll dry out, and the kivin sheyadesh yasrichu hisiach daitze mehem. So during the process where they dry out, they become quite smelly and foul and they're masriach, and therefore v'kiven de ikatartin. Since you've got two things, you've got two stages. Dachinu biyodayim. You've put them aside, you've sort of put them out to dry, and v'lo chazu. Right now they're masriach and they're no good. Then having muktzeh. So far the rule is that oichel, which is roy lachila in any form or shape, then that's not considered muktzeh. However, gregorus and smukim would be. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah. Ein shum oichel. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Cotton Base, the bedova she'ein oichel, because something which is not a food item, after Reb Shimon yesh muktzeh lefamim. Even Reb Shimon, who is mekel generally regarding muktzeh, he would agree that sometimes it would be muktzeh. Kugain muktzeh machmas chisaron kis. That category of muktzeh, something which is muktzeh because it causes a financial loss if it would get ruined. Or for example, something which is not a kli, even Reb Shimon would agree. Okay, tolish, but oichel, which is tolish, which is not mechuba, the bedava shay mechuba m'bayjem, because something which is attached to the ground from before Shabbos, gamkein lekula alma have muktzeh. Everyone would agree that is muktzeh. She'ein daite olav me'esmo, because you have no, you've got an apple growing on a tree. Your das is not on it. You're not intending to eat it, and therefore it's muktzeh. V'ayim beis Yosef, and see the beis Yosef. Okay, now even says the Mechaba that if the fruit that we're talking about is you're planning on selling it, the schera, it's still not muktzeh, and you're allowed to eat it. Afal gav do'imdim l'schera, even though you're Moshe Reich, and you're selling, you've got Norman's grocery, the fruit store, and you've got like boxes of apples and oranges and bananas, and you want to take one, no problem. Because because the mindset of the moicher is that if I want to, I can take an apple and orange, I can take from those things. Now, the interesting footnote, Omnom, legabe Esrogim ha'imdim l'schera. If you're a moicher lulav and esrog, and you've got Esrogim to sell, lifnei chag hasukas, das hagon v'shlem ezaman arbach, shedinom k'muktzeh machmas chisaron kis. Interesting. That's not the same as your apples and oranges and bananas. The Esrogim have got a din of muktzeh machmas chisaron kis, because there you take great care in them. There you're less bothered. You take an apple, it's nish gefährlich, but Esrogim, they're more expensive and you're more makbid. If, however, there are some fruit which perhaps are very expensive, so they could be makbid on them, and they could be muktzeh. So generally speaking, fruits or food which is set aside for schera is not muktzeh, because the standard mindset is that you could take them if you wanted to. However, things which you're more makbid about them, for example, esrogim or more expensive fruits, then because you're makbid, they've got a din of muktzeh. Okay, let's carry on the Mishnah Berurah. Sif Cotton Hay. Va'afilu chitzin shezoron ubeitzim rotzolema da'afagav dedochinu biyodayim l'shtamish bohen. The chitin and the kernels of wheat, you're not going to eat them because you put them in the ground to sow. Nevertheless, since you could sort of pick them, they're not considered muktzeh. Because for them to be muktzeh, you need two details. Number one, and number two, you've got to push them aside, and they're no good. Like we said previously with the Gregorus of Tzmukim, you were madchet biyadayim to put them into this room to go through the process of drying out, and they're masriach and they're not chazu. Now, an interesting note: what would you say about an avocado pit? The stone of the avocado. Sometimes you see that. Is that muktzeh? Interestingly, some people we do it at home. The kids, when they make a guacamole, what's it called? The avocado dip. So sometimes it changes its color quite quickly. But if you keep the avocado, the stone, in the actual guacamole, in the fridge, in the dish, before you transfer it to the dish to put on the table, it retains the freshness somehow. But what about the actual stone? If you take it out, is that muktzeh? So let's take a look at footnote 3. First, what he says, even though generally you're makbid on the chitim that you sewed, on each individual chitin, I'm not on the wheat, I'm not particularly bothered about. I'm just generally worried about the chitim in general. But each individual piece, if I wanted to take one, that's okay. Someone planted a little sapling and you are makbid, then it would have a higher status of muktzeh machzor and kis. מפני שצריח הזריע מחמס מה שעושה לגדול מהם מכל מקום כיוון שהגבדוסה אין מחמס חשיבוסן עד סומס אין נחשב עם מוקצה מחמס חסורן כיס. So if individual pieces of wheat you fancy nushing some wheat or whatever, that would be okay. Now next paragraph, v'garin avocado v'chodei mehamunach b'kais mayim, which is placed in a cup of water, das hagon shlomo zaman Orach shehu muktzeh kivin she'ein roi leklum. That, an individual avocado pit, I think that's what it's called, is ein roi leklum, and therefore it would in fact be muktzeh. V'af b'terem heichesh shiroshin b'mayim also l'nare, and therefore even before it sort of sprouts some roots, it's still considered muktzeh. V'pnei sha'kli im hamayim nechshavim b'bosis l'muktzeh v'nesru b'tiltul. Sometimes you put it in a cup of water and it will sprout, so that would be considered muktzeh. Okay, let's carry on the Mishnah Berurah. Sif cotton vov. So you put the chitin in the karka, it's actually okay to pick them out and to take it. Now, v'ayim b'meir shekosov, you may have been thinking this, the davka shelo hayu hazroim adayin mechusin ba'ofa. We're talking specifically where the chitin that you planted are not covered by offer. Because once it's planted by offer, then you've got other problems. You're digging, you've got chayresh or whatever it is. V'ayim lekaman b'sif shin yud aleph, sif ches, of Mishnah Berurah Sif Cotton Chav Zayin. Okay. Lo yishrishu. We're talking about taking it before it's taken root. To yishrishu says Mishnah Berurah Sif Cotton Zayin, because if it's taken root, hayachayev mishum oiker dova migidulay. You've got other problems. You've got toilesh. You're taking something from its growth. Okay. Furthermore, eichel, which is talush and not mechuba, is not muktzeh. Another example is beitzim shetachas atar negoles. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Cotton Ches, ubeitzim shetachas atar negoles rotzolema shehoishiv atar negoles ala beitzim. You place the chicken on the eggs miba'idiom kadei legadel efreichim. So you're allowed to take those eggs on Shabbos if you want to. Sif Cotton Tes kodim b'shulon. What's this going on? V'chein tmarim halakutim kodim b'shulam, and you put them in baskets to ripen, you're allowed to take those. Because even if when you put them in the keli, in the sal, there are those who eat the tmarim in this somewhat unripe state. Masha'in can be grogros with smukim, in contrast to the grogros and smukim, which are just not chazi at all. Shuv, you're matzche b'yodayim and they're not chazi. Shuv einam ru'im lachina ashes yapshu, because whilst they're going through the process of drying out, they're not really edible until they're properly dried out. Interesting footnote number 6. He says, "V'chein esrog sheyichtu lemitzvah." Aside from even if you're not a meiche Esrogim, which we said you're makbid on them and it's muktzeh machzor chesar kis, your own Esrog on Sukkot, on Shabbos, an Esrog is muktzeh. So if you are very organized and you buy your arba minim before Sukkot, for example, and on Shabbos you want to show someone your Esrog, so he says it's Esrog sheyichtu lemitzvah. You're not planning on eating it. You've set this aside for the mitzvah purpose, and therefore you shouldn't touch on Shabbos. Issa b'Gemara, just finishing off Sif Cotton Tes. Issa b'Gemara the dafka grogus smukim avosha peris shehela legag liyabshon ein ba mishum muktzeh. But other fruits which you may have taken to put on the roof to dry out are not muktzeh. Teim chozion lachila af kodim sheyisbashu. Because they're chozi lachila, you can eat those before they dry out. They're just sort of semi-dry. Mashenkin grows a smukim. A, you are matzche b'yodayim, and 2, they're masriach. They're considered smelly. Interesting footnote 7. V'chein melafafonim hakvushim b'kli. You're pickling cucumbers. You ever done this? In a jar, I remember my Zayd used to do it. You buy the cucumbers and you put them in a jar, a big glass jar, and you add water and I don't know what else, other ingredients, and they become pickled. You leave them there. So he says here, sorry, Rabbi Yashav, why? They're cucumbers. So if you want to take one before they're fully pickled, that's okay. It's just, there's like just cucumbers which are not fully pickled, that's all. So that would be okay. They're not muktzeh. Okay. Sif Kotan Yud, but muktzeh. So what did we say? So you take grogros and smukim and you put them in a muktzeh. What's a muktzeh? Says Mishnah Berurah, Sif Kotan Yud, rechava she'achere habatim kari muktzeh. A room which is at the back of a house, often exposed to the sunlight, is called a muktzeh. Va'afilu hoya eichel min ha'novim ad shechashecha v'hoyse v'nichem b'muktzeh. Even if you were eating the grapes and you leave them there in the muktzeh, you put them on the roof to dry out lasos osam tzmukin, to make raisins. Afilu hachishem muktzeh aleihem, they're considered muktzeh tahashta, given their nichem leyabshin asach daite minayu. Since you put them on the roof or in the backyard in the muktzeh, you're maksim medaita, and therefore they are muktzeh. Having muktzeh ahaynu afilu betzilsel asurin have to have a hein ka'avonim va'ofar. So they have quite a high status of muktzeh. It's muktzeh machmas the gufay. Okay, let's just finish off the Ramah. Says the Ramah at the top there. Yesh oimrim de'ein hachona shaykh b'shel ein Yehudi. Hachona is being making something is not shaykh for an ein Yehudi. Va'afilu grogros u'tzmukim shebeyodei mutarim. And even if he's muktzeh grogros and smukim, they're not muktzeh. Now why not? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Siv Kotan Yud Beis. The ein hachana rotzolema. Dava shel also be Israel mishum diskatzoi ben hashmoshes v'lo huzmin b'yijim. Something which belongs to a Jewish person, which was muktzeh ben hashmoshes, and he was not, didn't prepare it for Shabbos. But in the Yehudi lo shaykh zeh. In the parallel case with a non-Jewish person, it's not shaykh that. Why? The ein Yehudi maktzeh medaita klum. It's not shaykh the concept of a non-Jewish person being muktzeh midaitoi, because he's not chayiv to keep Shabbos. V'kiven shehu muchen leish echad muchen lekol. Because if he wants to change his mind and take it, he can. And therefore, since it's muchen for him, it's muchen for everybody. Avol dova the also ben hashmoshes mishum mechuba mishum shoyim mechusa tzeda. If, however, a ben hashmoshes it was mechuba, it was attached to the ground, or it was mechusa seder, it was lacking being caught, or tol shayni Yehudi or tzedek b'Shabbos, and the non-Jewish person was toilish it, he picked it, or he caught the item, esaf sha'adova hu shlein Yehudi l'kula alma osa. Then we say it is muktzeh. V'chein be'isa noilet gam kein hochi. V'afilu grogros, even if he takes grogros and puts them to the sides, and still they're not muktzeh. Rotzolema. Ta'af she'ele ha'ni Yehudi b'yidem yavshem ta'havim d'dochim yadayim. Even though the non-Jewish person puts them out to dry and is doichim yadayim, mikol mokum lo yichol alai u'shei muktzeh. It hasn't got the status of muktzeh. He questions this, because he set it aside, and it's not chazil achila. Is the non-Jewish person more than this? He discusses this. The Graz says like the Beis Meir. Thank you so much. Thank you. The Graz says like the Beis Meir, so Tafka, when the non-Jewish person takes the grogos and smukim and says those, they may be edible, they may be not edible, the Pesach HaShulchan Aruch Shom Mahani Hazmona. There, Hazmona helps. But zeh posek hakol b'yid ve'einu Yehudi afilu iloi hizmin mahani de'einu maksim midaitei. But if it's not chazi at all, the Chaim and afilu Hazmona lo mahani b'Yisrael For a Jewish person, Hazmon is not going to help you. B'zeh enough kamina bein Yisrael and Yehudi. So if it's not chazi at all, everyone would agree, even the non-Jewish person who sets it aside, it would not be good. So let me just summarize. The summary is that any food which is tolish and which is roi lachila is not muktzeh. So therefore, tomorrow mishkedim peiros, even if it's omed l'schera, since the moiche could take it and nash on Shabbos, no problem. If it's expensive, for example, you're a moiche ab minim, then the esrogim would be muktzeh, and your own personal esrog, which you set aside for the mitzvah, is also muktzeh. And even eggs, which are underneath the chicken and things like that, it's all roi lachila, and therefore they're not muktzeh. However, there are some things which you mamish set aside, for example, grogris utzmukim, which you put it on your backyard to dry out, since you were mesiachim edaitoi, you matzchab yodaim, and it's not chazu, because during the process it's matzriach, those sort of things would be muktzeh. Beseder.